Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are we're wading into some waters that I think every single person listening is currently swimming in, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, definitely. It's the water we swim in every day.
Right. So maybe you're listening to this on your commute right now and you're just dreading that mountain of emails waiting for you. Or, maybe you're doing the dishes and feeling like your to-do list is actually mocking you from the counter. We are talking about the daily grind. We are talking about the unscratchable itch for, well, just for more.
And crucially, we're talking about where God fits into all of that. Because usually we keep those things in entirely separate boxes.
Oh, 100%. We have the Sunday morning box for God and then the Monday through Saturday box for the grind. But today we are just mashing those boxes together.
Mashing them, I love that.
We're doing a really comprehensive look at the intersection of Christian faith, modern work culture, ambition, and this massive invisible force called consumerism. And I have to say, looking at the stack of research you've pulled together for this one, this isn't just for the pastors or the theologians in the audience.
Not at all. I mean, if we did that, we'd be completely missing the point.
Right. This is for the business leader who's trying to hit Q4 targets and feels maybe a little gross about how hard they're pushing their team. Or it's for the side hustler driving Uber on the weekends just to make rent.
Or the stay-at-home parent, honestly, feeling that crushing pressure to be productive even when they're totally exhausted.
Yeah. Basically, if you have ever felt that tension between doing and being, this deep dive is custom built for you.
That tension is exactly what we need to explore today. You mentioned the boxes, the Sunday self and the Monday self. The mission of this deep dive is to synthesize a really diverse stack of sources to figure out why those boxes exist in the first place and how we can break them down.
So what are we actually looking at today, just to give the listener a sense of the scope here?
We have a lot. We have theological essays, sermons, practical guides on the gig economy, and some very deep academic work.
Yeah.
We're trying to answer one massive question. How does a Christian faithfully navigate a world that is absolutely obsessed with production, consumption, and status?
It's a huge question, and honestly, it's a dangerous one. Because the answer might require us to fundamentally change how we live. But let's unpack what's on the table. We aren't just reading a few top 10 tips for time management blog posts today.
No. We are going way deeper. We have academic reflections from Baylor University's Christian Reflection series, specifically their work on consumerism. This is heavy-hitting stuff.
Yeah.
Real sociological and theological analysis.
Right.
We also have a robust theology of work from the Center for Enterprise Markets and Ethics.
Which, by the way, I found surprisingly practical. I kind of expected it to be dry, but it was very, gritty.
It is very gritty. But then we balance that out with very on-the-ground articles about grind culture and side hustles from platforms like Type.ly and the Ministry Collaborative. And finally, we have some really vulnerable personal reflections on ambition from writers like Matt Ragland and Sidney King.
So we are covering the entire spectrum here. We're talking about the metaphysical meaning of labor, like why we work at all. But we're also talking about the spiritual dangers of what one of the sources calls stuff love.
Stuff love, yeah. It's a catchy phrase for a really deadly spiritual condition.
And we're going to get into this concept of humbition.
Yes, humbition.
I just love that word. It sounds like a made-up corporate buzzword, but the definition in the text is actually profound. Humility plus ambition, and how that specific combination might be the key to serving God rather than serving our own ego.
It's a fascinating concept. But I think to really start this off right, we have to look at the hook that Matt Ragland provides in his reflection on ambition. Because he poses a question that I think haunts a lot of us, especially in these high-performance cultures we live in. He asks, very simply, when is blank enough?
When is blank enough? Wow. And you can fill in that blank with literally anything. When is the money enough?
When is the recognition enough?
When is the success enough? When are the likes on Instagram enough?
Exactly. Ragland talks about this cycle of striving. He calls it the shadow within us that just constantly wants recognition and rewards versus the light that genuinely wants to serve. And I think that sets the stage perfectly for our journey today.
Yeah, it really does.
Because we need to move from the diagnosis of our current cultural sickness, which we'll call affluenza and grind culture, to the theological foundation of what work was actually meant to be. And then finally to the practical application, like how do we actually live this out in a gig economy?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the diagnosis. You mentioned affluenza. Now, I feel like I heard this term thrown around a lot in the 90s, but usually as a joke about rich kids who don't know the value of a dollar.
Right, exactly.
But the source from Baylor University treats it as something much more serious. They aren't joking around with this term.
No, they are dead serious. The Baylor source defines affluenza as a contagious, addictive virus. It's the condition that makes us believe that too much is not enough. And what's fascinating is that the source argues this isn't just about buying things.
Really?
It's not just about hoarding stuff in your garage. It is and this is a quote, a character-cultivating way of life.
A character-cultivating way of life. That is a terrifying phrase. So consumerism isn't just a bad financial habit, it's actually discipling us.
Precisely. It's forming us. Think about what discipleship is at its core. It's a process of formation through habits, rituals, and teachings. Consumerism has all of those things. The mall, or let's be real, the Amazon app on your phone.
Yeah, it's the temple.
It is the temple. The advertising is the sermon. The purchase is the ritual. And the source argues that this formation fosters very specific character traits over time: avarice, aggression, and self-centeredness.
Okay, but let me push back on that a little bit. I mean, I buy groceries. I buy shoes when mine wear out. Am I afflicted with this virus? Where exactly is the line between just needing stuff to survive in the modern world and this spiritual sickness?
That is the key question. And the source actually lists symptoms that help us identify when it crosses that line. For instance, do you get bored if you don't have something to consume, whether that's goods or food or even media? Do you use shopping as therapy to regulate your emotions?
Retail therapy. We joke about it all the time, but you're saying the source treats it as a symptom of a spiritual disease.
It does. If you're feeling lonely or anxious, and your immediate reflex is to pull out your phone and buy something to soothe that ache, that is affluenza. It's maxing out credit cards. It's filling trash bags with stuff we bought and barely even used. But the deeper insight here, the one that really struck me when I was reviewing this, is how it commodifies relationships.
Okay, explain that. How do I commodify a relationship?
Well, when you view the world primarily through the lens of a consumer, you start to view absolutely everything as a product designed to meet your needs. You start asking, what is this person doing for me? Is this friendship giving me a good return on investment? We start viewing friends, spouses, and here's the real kicker, even God, as objects to be consumed.
Oof, so God just becomes a giant vending machine in the sky. If I put in the right prayer coins, I get the blessing product dispensed to me.
Exactly. And the source talks about this concept of consecrated consumerism. And this is where it gets really uncomfortable for those of us in the church.
I'm bracing myself.
It talks about how the church itself has adopted market values. We treat congregants as a target audience. We literally package the gospel as a product to be consumed.
I mean, I've seen this. Come to our church, we have better coffee in the lobby. Come to our church, the worship band sounds like a rock concert.
Right. It becomes entirely about user experience rather than actual worship.
Yeah.
And the source makes a really sharp point here. Consumerism trains us to be suspicious.
How so?
When you're shopping, you're always looking for the catch. You're looking at a shirt asking, is this really 100% cotton? Is this really the best price? Or can I get it cheaper online? And we bring that exact same suspicion into the pews on Sunday. We sit there with our arms crossed, basically rating the sermon on a 5-star scale.
That is profound. It's like we are walking around with a mental clipboard, acting like critics instead of participants in the body of Christ. We aren't receiving a word from God. We're evaluating a performance.
Right. And that completely kills intimacy. You cannot be intimate with God, or a spouse for that matter, if you're constantly evaluating their performance as a product.
Wow. So affluenza destroys our ability to connect because it turns everyone else into a commodity. But affluenza is really just one side of the coin, right? That's the consuming side. We also have to talk about the producing side, the grind.
The grind. The other great American idol.
We have the source from the Ministry Collaborative and another from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary sets that discuss grind culture. How do they define it? Because, grinding is usually used as a compliment in business circles today. Like, oh, he's on his grind.
They define grind culture as the core belief that you are only as valuable as what you produce. It's the no days off mentality. It's the idea that your worth as a human being is generated entirely by your output.
There was a specific example in the Tithe Roller article that honestly horrified me when I read it. It was about an ad campaign in the New York City subways.
Oh, the year of due.
Yes, the year of due. The tagline was, "In doers we trust," which, first of all, is a direct replacement of "In God we trust."
Replacing God with doers. It's subtle, but it's deeply theological. It basically says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Our salvation comes from our own hands.
But the ad copy itself, You have to read this part. It sounded like a parody to me, but it was real.
I have it right here. The ad said, you eat a coffee for lunch, you follow through on your follow-through. Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice. You might be a doer.
Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice. They are literally marketing exhaustion as a virtue. They're saying if you are actively destroying your physical body, you are a hero of the modern economy.
They are framing self-destruction as a status symbol. And the sources argue that this is sinful in nature, not just unhealthy, not just bad for your cortisol levels, but actually sinful.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. We're talking to leaders, we're talking to entrepreneurs, people who build things from scratch. Hard work is a virtue, isn't it? I mean, the Bible explicitly talks about the ant working hard in Proverbs. Scripture condemns laziness left and right. So if I'm grinding to build a business to feed my family or to keep my church running, is that really sinful? Or are we just being kind of soft?
That is the crucial distinction to make here. The sources aren't attacking effort. They are attacking identity.
Differentiate those for me.
Effort is what you do. Identity is who you are. The source from SEPS argues that grind culture becomes sinful when the output becomes the ultimate source of your worth. It's the massive difference between working hard because you have a mission and working hard because you're terrified that if you stop, you literally cease to matter.
So it's the why, not the what.
Precisely. It's what Brene Brown calls stumping for worthiness. We are out there hustling to prove that we matter, and this displaces the imago Dei, the image of God. Our true value comes from who we are. We are created by God, loved by God. Grind culture says your value comes from your spreadsheet.
That creates a treadmill you can never, ever get off of because you can always do more.
And you always have to. If your worth is based on your last success, you are only as good as your last quarter. That is a guaranteed recipe for anxiety and burnout. And the source deliberately contrasts this frantic pace with Jesus.
Right. Jesus had a mission. He had a deadline, literally. He only had 3 years of public ministry. But the sources say he didn't grind.
Look at his rhythms in the Gospels. The sources note that Jesus prioritized rest. He prioritized prayer. He prioritized slow relationships. He constantly withdrew from the crowds, the market, so to speak, to be alone with the Father. He took naps on boats in the middle of raging storms. He definitely did not subscribe to the sleep deprivation is my drug of choice model.
So if grind culture is the villain here, is the answer just self-care? Because I see a ton of that on social media too. Protect your peas, take bubble baths, you do you. Is that the Christian alternative to the grind?
You would think so, right? But the Sebbit source, the Theological Seminary article, gets really nuanced here. It argues that grind culture and self-care culture are actually two sides of the exact same coin.
Wait, really? They seem like complete opposites. One is working yourself to death and the other is aggressively pampering yourself.
They seem like opposites on the surface, but they share a common center, and that center is the self.
Ah. It's all about me either way.
Exactly. Grind culture says, I am what I produce. Self-care culture often says, I am the most important thing in the universe and I need to pamper myself. It's often very therapeutic and entirely self-focused. It conveniently ignores the fact that, as Christians, we are called to pour ourselves out in service for others.
So what's the third option then? If it's not the grind and it's not self-care, where do we land?
They call it gospel culture.
Gospel culture. Break that down for me.
The core belief of gospel culture is, I am not my own. I belong to Christ. And this reorients absolutely everything. It reorients your work. Because now I'm working for him, not for my own ego or bank account. And it reorients rest, because I'm resting in his finished work on the cross, not just trying to recharge my biological batteries so I can go produce more widgets tomorrow.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It moves the center of gravity completely outside of ourselves.
Exactly. It frees you from the tyranny of the self.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. We've got the fever of affluenza on one hand and the idolatry of the grind on the other. I want to pivot now to the theological foundation of all this, because I think a lot of us have a really messed up view of work in general. We tend to think work is the curse, right? We think, Adam ate the apple, and now as punishment, I have to sit in this cubicle for 40 years.
That is such a common misconception. We act as if work is the direct punishment for sin. But the source, Recovering a Theology of Work, corrects that immediately. It reminds us to look at the origin story. Work is not a punishment.
Prove it. What does the text say?
Go back to Genesis 1 and 2. This is before the fall, before the snake, before the apple, before sin ever enters the world. God puts humanity in the garden to tend and keep it. Work is actually part of paradise.
So in a perfect, unfallen world, we still have jobs.
We still have work because God is a worker. That is literally the very first thing we learn about God in the Bible. He isn't some nebulous passive force. He is an active creator. The Bible describes him as a gardener planting Eden, a shepherd, a potter molding clay.
And a potter gets his hands dirty. He's literally digging in the mud.
Exactly. God is an architect and a builder. And this brings us right back to that term we threw around earlier, imago Dei, the image of God.
Right.
Usually we think that being made in God's image means we have an immortal soul, or that we have the capacity to reason. But the Theology of Work source points out that if God is fundamentally a worker, and we are made in his image, then we are intrinsically designed to be workers too. We are what they call sub-creators.
Sub-creators, I really like that. We are basically mimicking the family trade.
Yes. This is what theologians call the creation mandate. God's instruction wasn't, Adam, just sit there and look pretty while I do everything. It was, Adam, here is a world full of raw material. Make something out of it. Bring order out of chaos.
So work isn't the penalty. Work is actually the purpose. But let's be real for a second. It doesn't always feel like purpose. It often feels like total drudgery. Where do the Monday morning blues come from if work is so divine?
Well, that's where the impact of the fall comes in. Genesis 3 introduces the thorns and thistles.
The spreadsheets that won't balance, the emails that never stop, the boss who gaslights you.
The overarching feeling of futility. That is the curse. The ground fights back now. The source explains that the tension we feel every day is that work is essential for our human dignity. It's how we express our God-given creativity, but it is now frustrated by sin and difficulty. It's broken, just like everything else in the world.
I really liked the section in that source about enterprise, because usually when we talk about having a theology of work in church, we're talking about being a pastor or a missionary, or maybe a doctor or a teacher. Helpful professions. But this source dives straight into business. It talks about risk and profit.
Yes, it defines enterprise as innovation, creativity, and risk-taking. And it grounds this deeply in the biblical text. It points to people like Tubal-Cain in Genesis, who was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. He was effectively launching the first industrial revolution.
And Lydia in the New Testament.
Lydia is a great example. She was a dealer in purple cloth, a very successful businesswoman. She was dealing in high-end luxury goods and funding the early church with her profits. And the Proverbs 31 woman is basically a real estate mogul and an international trader. She considers a field and buys it. She's investing capital.
And of course, the ultimate example, Jesus himself.
The carpenter.
We totally gloss over that. We skip straight from the manger to the Sermon on the Mount.
We do. But for 30 years, which is 90% of his earthly life, the Son of God was a blue-collar worker in a small town. He navigated business. He dealt with customers who probably complained about the price of a table. He had to source raw wood. He had actual calluses on his hands.
That really grounds it for me. It
Yeah.
sanctifies the ordinary, gritty work of running a business. It means you can be holy while you're negotiating a contract or doing payroll.
It absolutely does. And the sources are careful to point out that the Bible warns against the love of money, not wealth itself. Wealth creation can be a direct result of the creation mandate to be fruitful and multiply. The key distinction the source makes here is between the instrumental and intrinsic value of work.
Break that down. What's the difference?
Instrumental value is working just to eat. It's viewing work purely as a means to an end. I work to pay my bills so I can go home and live my real life.
Which is valid. I mean, we all need to eat.
It is valid. But if that's all it is, we are missing something huge. Intrinsic value is working to express creativity and to serve others. It's believing that the work itself actually matters to God. That building a good, sturdy table, or writing clear software code, or cleaning a hospital floor with excellence actively glorifies God because it brings order out of chaos. It's moving toward good work that allows for human flourishing.
I love that. It elevates the daily grind into something sacred. But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a little tricky for us. We've established that work is good. But what about ambition? Because I feel like in a lot of Christian circles, ambition is treated as a dirty word. It sounds suspiciously like pride. It sounds like you just want to be famous and successful.
This is a major pivot point in our deep dive today. And we have a fantastic source from Sidney King called Righteous Ambition that tackles this exact tension head on. Because you're right, the common Christian hesitation is that ambition equals pride. We're taught that we are supposed to be meek. We're supposed to be purely humble.
He must increase, but I must decrease.
Right. But King argues that ambition is actually a morally neutral tool. It's like a knife. You can use a knife to murder someone, or a surgeon can use that exact same knife to perform life-saving surgery. The knife itself isn't evil. The intent behind it is what matters.
So what determines the morality of ambition? How do we know if our ambition is good or bad?
It's all about the object of the ambition. If the object is the self, if you are seeking distinction for your own ego, your power, your fame, then yes, that is secular ambition. That is spiritually dangerous.
Yeah.
But there is such a thing as righteous ambition.
Which is what?
It's seeking distinction on behalf of God. It's being driven by this burning desire to use the gifts God gave you to their absolute fullest potential for the benefit of the church and your community.
So it's not about suppressing your drive or pretending you don't want to achieve things. It's about aiming that drive at the right target.
Exactly. And this is where that incredible word comes in, humbition.
Humbition. Humility plus ambition.
Here is the definition of humility that King provides, and it completely changes everything. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It isn't walking around saying, I'm terrible, I'm worthless, I'm just a worm.
Which is exactly what a lot of us think humility looks like. We think it's constant self-deprecation.
Right. But true humility is simply recognizing that your gifts come from God. You didn't invent your own intellect. You didn't invent your talent or your energy. It is a gift. And because it's a gift, ambition is the drive to actually use that gift. If you bury your talent in the dirt because you're trying to be humble, that's not humility. That's actually poor stewardship.
Yeah, immediately reminds me of the parable of the talents. The guy who buried his talent in the ground, the one who played it totally safe, he was the one who got reprimanded by the master.
Precisely. He was afraid. True ambition is looking at what God gave you and saying, I'm going to multiply this for the master's use. There's a brilliant quote referenced in the text from Archbishop Oscar Romero that nails this tension perfectly. He said, we must serve the people according to God's will and not according to our whim. It's all about service.
But let's be real for a minute. It is so hard to keep those lines clear in our own hearts. Matt Ragland's piece on balancing ambition and contentment was so relatable to me because he openly admits the struggle. He talks about having a shadow and a light constantly at war inside of him.
He does. He says the light in him genuinely wants to serve people and connect with them. But the shadow desperately wants recognition. It wants the applause. And his deepest struggle is with that hook question we talked about earlier. When is it enough?
I think we all feel that shadow. You launch a new project or you preach a sermon and your conscious mind wants to help people. But you also really, really want to check the metrics to see how many people liked it or downloaded it.
And what's the theological answer to that craving? Because the world's answer is very clear. The world says never. The world says it's enough when you get just one more promotion, just one more $1 million, just 10,000 more followers.
So what does the gospel say?
The theological answer, according to these sources, is that you are already enough in Christ.
You are already enough.
And I know that sounds like a cliche we just slap on a coffee mug or a bumper sticker, but think about the actual mechanical implication of it. If you are already fully accepted, if your identity is already completely secure in Christ, then you don't have to work to get validation. You work from a place of validation.
Oh, that is good. You're not working for love, you're working from love.
Exactly. Ragland says this profound realization frees you to work out of joy, rather than a desperate, anxious need to prove that you exist and have value. We don't stop working hard. We stop striving for worth.
That is the key distinction right there. We stop striving for worth.
Okay, so let's bring this down to the pavement. We've got the theology, we've got this redefined concept of humbition. How does this actually look on a random Tuesday? Specifically, I want to talk about the gig economy, because the tithe, that lowly source, should Christians have a side hustle, throws some really interesting numbers at us.
It really does. It mentions that 57 million Americans are currently participating in the freelance economy. That is a massive chunk of the modern workforce. And interestingly, it notes that many pastors and ministry leaders are actually part of that number now.
The bivocational reality, it's more common than ever.
Right, and the article frames the side hustle not just as a practical way to pay off student loan debt, though that's obviously a big part of it, but potentially as a genuine form of ministry.
It goes right back to Paul the Tentmaker, Acts 18. Paul is in Corinth. He's an apostle, he's a big deal. But he's sitting there sticking tough leather or goat hair together to make tents. Why? To fund his mission and to maintain his financial independence so he wasn't a burden on the local church. He essentially had a side hustle.
A literal side hustle.
And the modern application they draw is fascinating. The source tells a story of a mid-50s mother who was driving for Uber.
I loved this story when I read it.
She wasn't doing it just for the cash, though she certainly appreciated having her own spending money. She saw it as a form of freedom. But the host of the article, Daniel M., challenges us to see that Uber car as a mobile prayer booth.
A mobile prayer booth. I have to admit, that sounds a little cheesy at first glance.
It does sound cheesy, but think about the actual proximity it affords. You are driving through your city. You are locking yourself in a metal box with total strangers for 15, maybe 20 minutes at a time. You are meeting people you would absolutely never meet inside a church building.
That's very true. Most people in our secular culture aren't just walking into a church building on a Sunday morning to see what's going on, but they're getting into an Uber. They are buying custom items from an Etsy shop. They're hiring a freelance graphic designer online.
Exactly. These side hustles put Christians in circles they wouldn't otherwise ever reach, and the work itself becomes a sermon.
How so? Like, without being weird and preachy to your customers.
Through your integrity,
Mhm.
through fair pricing, through radical reliability. In a gig economy where people are often flaky or they ghost you or they try to rip you off, being a freelancer who simply keeps their word and delivers excellence is a powerful Christian witness. It embodies that Mephibosheth mindset mentioned in the Consumerism source.
Okay, you have to explain the Mephibosheth mindset.
Yeah.
Because that is a deep cut. I haven't heard that name since I was in Sunday school using flannel graph.
It is a very deep cut from 2 Samuel 9, but it is one of the most beautiful stories of grace in the Old Testament. Mephibosheth was the grandson of King Saul.
Saul, the bitter enemy of David.
Right. So culturally, in the ancient Near East, when a new king takes the throne, he routinely kills the entire family of the old king just to prevent any future rebellion. Mephibosheth knows this. He's living in hiding. And he's disabled. The text specifically says he was lame in both feet because he was dropped by a nurse who was fleeing in a panic when he was just 5 years old.
So he's completely marginalized, he's living in fear, and he essentially has a royal death sentence hanging over his head.
And then King David actively calls for him. Mephibosheth probably thinks, well, this is it, I'm dead. He goes in and falls on his face before David. And what does David say? He says, do not fear, I will show you kindness, and you shall eat at my table always.
He gets a permanent seat at the king's table, not execution, but total restoration.
And Mephibosheth knows he absolutely doesn't deserve it. He calls himself a dead dog. He says, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? He is profoundly content just to be allowed in the room. He views everything he has as pure grace.
And what's the contrast here for us?
The contrast, the consumer mindset we talked about earlier. The consumer always feels entitled, I deserve this. This service isn't fast enough. I demand to speak to the manager. But the Mephibosheth mindset in business moves us away from what I deserve into a posture of deep gratitude and service.
So let's apply that to a modern business scenario. You're in a tough negotiation. The other guy is being unreasonable and difficult. How does someone with a Mephibosheth mindset handle that?
The consumer mindset says, I need to extract maximum value from this guy right now. If I don't win this negotiation, I lose. The Mephibosheth mindset says, I am here by grace. I am already seated safely at the king's table. I don't need to destroy this person across from me to prove my worth or secure my future. So how can I serve them while still conducting good business?
It totally flips the script. It changes how you negotiate. It changes how you treat your difficult clients. It seamlessly integrates your Christian faith into the actual ethics of the transaction.
It creates a genuinely non-anxious presence in the boardroom because you aren't fighting for your life anymore. You're already safe at the table.
That is incredibly powerful. But man, it's also really hard because the cultural pressure out there is very real. The year of do is screaming at us from the subway ads. Affluenza is viral and contagious. How do we actually fight back against this? What is the practical antidote? Because just relying on our willpower is clearly not enough.
No, willpower always fails eventually. The sources argue that if consumerism is a formation, if it is actively training our desires, then we need counterformation. We need intentional practices that train our bodies and souls in the exact opposite direction.
Give me the practices. What do we actually physically do?
The first one highlighted is the Eucharist, communion.
Communion. That feels a bit disconnected from the business world, doesn't it?
It feels disconnected, but Mark Medley's essay strongly argues that it is the central Christian act of economic resistance. Think about it. Consumerism says, I consume, therefore I am. It is a highly individualistic act of taking. I see, I want, I buy, I possess.
It's an aggressive posture.
But the Eucharist says, we are members of God's body. It is a deeply communal act of receiving. When you hold out your open hands for the bread, you are physically admitting your hunger. You are admitting that you cannot ultimately feed yourself.
It's a posture of total dependency.
And it trains us in other-centeredness. It trains us in fidelity or loyalty in a culture that thrives on disposability. When we take communion, we are participating in a logic that is the exact opposite of the free market. We are publicly declaring, I am not a consumer here. I am a participant in a living body.
That is deep. It makes taking communion on Sunday morning feel like a radical protest.
It is a protest. It's an act of spiritual and political resistance against the empire of the self. And the other major act of counterformation is rest, specifically the Sabbath.
Going right back to the idea that grind culture will not save us.
Yes. The source quotes Tricia Hershey, who explicitly frames rest as an act of resistance against a capitalist and even white supremacist system that just wants to grind human bodies down for profit.
And the sources emphasize that trusting God requires stopping. There's that great line in there, God takes care of God's own.
God takes care of God's own. Resting physically proves that you actually trust God to keep the world spinning without your help. Think about what you're secretly saying when you refuse to stop working. You are implicitly saying, if I stop checking my email, the universe collapses. It all depends on me.
Ouch. So refusing to rest is actually a form of functional atheism, like practical atheism.
It is a direct denial of God's sovereignty. It's basically saying, God might be king in theory, but I'm the prime minister who actually runs the day-to-day operations around here. Jordan Rayner's source on trusting versus hustling puts this tension perfectly. He says we are absolutely called to work with all our heart. That's the hustle part, but we must deeply trust that it is God who actually produces the wealth.
Source straight from Deuteronomy 8.72.
Exactly. It is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. The biblical balance is this: hustle in the work, but trust in the results.
I really like that distinction. You can work incredibly hard, but you don't have to stress yourself to death about the outcome, because the outcome isn't ultimately in your hands anyway.
And Raynor gives a fantastic litmus test for this.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to just say, we trust God.
What's the test?
Can you sleep?
Can you sleep? Why?
If you can't rest, if you physically can't turn your brain off at night, if you are tossing and turning with anxiety, checking Slack messages at 2 a.m., you aren't actually trusting God. You are just hustling. Sleep is the ultimate daily act of trust. It's saying, Lord, I am going to go unconscious for 8 hours now. I will be totally vulnerable and completely unproductive. And I trust you to handle the world while I'm gone.
That is deeply convicting. I think a lot of us are failing that litmus test on a weekly basis. We view sleep as a weakness or just a biological inconvenience.
But it's actually a vital spiritual discipline. It's how we physically remind our bodies that we aren't God.
So let's synthesize all of this. We have been on quite a journey today. We started with the contagious virus of affluenza and the idolatry of the grind. We've seen that work isn't the enemy. It's actually part of God's original beautiful design, tainted by the fall, but being redeemed by Christ.
We've seen that ambition isn't inherently a sin, provided it's righteous ambition, humbition aimed entirely at God's glory and the good of others, rather than our own status.
And we've seen that the gig economy, side hustles, and global business can actually be incredibly potent mission fields if we bring that Mephibosheth mindset of deep gratitude and service into our daily interactions.
And finally, we saw that the only way to stay sane, the only way to inoculate ourselves against the virus of consumerism is through counter-practices like the Eucharist and Sabbath rest. Trusting, not just endlessly hustling.
I want to challenge everyone listening right now. Where do you fall in all of this? Are you suffering from affluenza, constantly buying things to fill a spiritual void? Are you buying into the year of thinking that your sleep deprivation is somehow a badge of honor? Or maybe you are paralyzed by a fear of ambition, actively burying your God-given talent in the dirt because you're terrified of being perceived as proud.
The beautiful alternative to all of that is gospel culture. It's working incredibly hard because you are already accepted. You aren't working to become someone important. You are working because of who you already are in Christ.
That is the exact freedom we're all looking for.
I want to leave us with one final provocative image from the research. In the Theology of Work source, there is a really moving reference to a painting of the first Thanksgiving, but it also directly alludes to the wedding feast of the Lamb in the book of Revelation.
The big party at the end of time.
Exactly. Scripture describes eternity not as some ethereal cloud where we float around playing harps forever. It describes a city, the New Jerusalem, a garden city coming down to earth.
And a city has architecture, it has culture, it has commerce and life.
It has civilization, it has enterprise. So if eternity is a functioning, glorious city, then our work today, Our architecture, our art, our business plans, our humble side hustles is a literal practice run. It's a foreshadowing of the new creation. We are currently learning the songs and the practical skills of the coming kingdom.
That completely changes everything. We aren't just sitting in a waiting room passing time until the bus comes to take us to heaven. We are actively building.
But the haunting question the sources leave us with is this. Are you building for a kingdom of self, or are you building for the kingdom of God? Because ultimately, only one of those cities is going to last.
That is definitely something to chew on this week. Well, thank you for diving so deep with us today and unpacking all of this.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And to everyone listening, keep working, keep resting, and above all, keep trusting. We'll see you on the next deep dive.